Hello, my name is Katie and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be going over some of my most anticipated spring releases with you. So there are 15 spring releases that I kind of have on my radar that I've added to my Goodreads list and that I may have requested advanced copies for, or have already received advanced copies for, or that I already have kind of on hold at the library. Now, I don't necessarily know that I'll actually be able to read all 15 of these this year, but they are ones that I would like to read eventually and that I just think sound and look really, really good. The first book that I am looking forward to reading today is called Please See Us by Kaitlyn Mullen. Now this is a psychological thriller. It comes out on March the 3rd. It's a debut novel by this author. And this book is kind of about two young women who become unlikely friends. It takes place in Atlantic City, and the city is kind of suspiciously quiet over the summer season. And then I guess there's also a young woman who is a psychic who seems to be having some visions about what might be happening to some girls who are mysteriously going missing. So it's not a lot of details to go on, but it was kind of enough to hook me in to make me think, oh yeah, like this sounds kind of interesting. I might want to give it a read. It's reminiscent of Laura Lippman and Chloe Benjamin. Not that I've read either of those authors, but I have heard their names. So if you've read either of those authors, you might want to put this book on your radar as well. That is the first book that comes out. I am going to do these kind of in order of release date. So it's not necessarily that I'm most excited for the ones that I talk about first, but they're the ones that are coming out sooner than the others. The next book that I'm looking forward to is called How a Woman Becomes a Lake by Marjorie Celona, and this book comes out as well on March 3rd. This is about a woman who goes missing in a small town, and her disappearance kind of sets off a chain of events, and in this book it sounds like it talks about just how her disappearance kind of affects other people in the community. It sounds like we get the perspective of her grieving husband and the cop who's investigating the case as they try and kind of figure out why this woman disappeared and what happened to her. It says it's told from shifting perspectives, and it is about childhood, familial bonds, and costly mistakes. So it just sounds really interesting. It's marketed as general fiction, but it does sound a bit suspenseful, so I don't know exactly how that's going to be. But it's supposed to have like the pull and pace of a thriller, so it sounds kind of up my alley. Like, I don't really know. I've mentioned before that I'm kind of just getting into thrillers, but I do enjoy a good literary novel and a book with a good story. So I'm hoping that this will be interesting as well. The next book that I'm excited for also comes out on March 3rd, and that is The Two Lives of Lydia Byrd by Josie Silver. It's claimed to be two lives, two loves, one impossible choice. Whatever that means, just sounds intriguing. It's marketed as chick lit, which isn't necessarily a genre that I'm drawn to, but the premise does sound pretty interesting. It's about a young woman who is reunited with her late fiance in some sort of parallel life, and whether that's the happy ending that she is actually wanting. Jodi Picoult, who is one of my favorite authors, has blurbed this book. So that means that she's read it and she's given like a one sentence review. And often blurbs are on like the dust jacket or the back cover of a book, or even the front cover sometimes. So she says that I read The Two Lives of Lydia Byrd in one sitting. What a beautiful emotional gift Josie Silver has given us. So that's what Jodi Picoult says. So, you know, knowing that she's read it and loved it kind of also is why this book is intriguing to me. Kind of claimed to be a powerful and thrilling love story about the what ifs that arise from life's crossroads and what happens when a woman is given a miraculous chance to answer them. So I think it sounds interesting. I definitely want to check this out as kind of maybe like a lighter read that gets thrown in my monthly mix of books. Now, the next book that I am excited for, it comes out on March the 10th, is In 5 Years by Rebecca Serle, and I actually have read this book. So I'm not going to talk too much about it because I will be giving more details about it in my monthly wrap-up. But In 5 Years, it's a love story, it's a romance, a contemporary novel, and it's set in New York City, and it's basically about a woman who has a dream that's 5 years in the future, and it really kind of unsettles her. And then when she wakes up, she can't help thinking about this dream. And eventually she actually meets a man who starred in her dream, and it kind of sets the trajectory of her life maybe on a different direction. So it's a really, really interesting premise. I was really, really excited to read it, and I really, really enjoyed it. And that's all I'm going to say. Definitely, if you are a romance fan, please have this on your radar because it is a worthwhile read. It's marketed to fans of Me Before You, but I didn't really like Me Before You. This book is definitely better in my opinion, but that's kind of how it's marketed. So do check that one out. The next book that I have on my list is also out on March 10th, and it's called My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Now, this is marketed as psychological fiction, so I don't know how thrilling it is, but it's definitely a mind-twisting type of book, and it's about a young girl who's asked to help defend an older English teacher with whom she had an affair at the age of 15. And as the main character, her name's Vanessa, struggles to choose kind of between her romantic teen illusions and her adult perceptions. It's got alternating timelines. It's kind of a coming of age story about a girl kind of understanding her body and understanding kind of her power and her sexuality, and also coming to terms with her adolescence and growing up and how that all plays a role in a young woman's life. It's supposed to be thought-provoking and can't put it down, and it's kind of written with like a haunting intimacy, it says. So I'm excited for this book. It just sounds really, really interesting and kind of like one of those books that you just want to read because it's going to make you really think about life, maybe think about things like as a woman. Not that I can necessarily maybe relate to the actual premise of the book, but it just sounds really interesting. The next book that I'm excited for is called A Good Neighborhood by Therese and Fowler. Now, this book just sounds really, really interesting. A good family saga, good domestic literary fiction. It's about the single mother of a mixed-race college student and a thriving business owner with a troubled daughter, and they kind of clash over this oak tree in their neighborhood as both of their teenage children kind of start to develop a relationship, maybe a romance. I don't know. It's a book that just kind of asks the question of how well do you know your neighbors? You know, what are community relationships supposed to be? You know, we look at class, race. Jodi Picoult also blurbed this book and called it a feast of a read. So whatever that means. But if she's putting her name on it, if she's kind of promoting this book, then it's definitely one that I want to check out. It just sounds like a really, really good story. I do like books that are kind of set in like a suburban neighborhood and involve families, so it's right up my alley. The last book that I have on my radar that's coming out in March is Darling Rose Gold by Stephanie Wrobel. Now, I do have this book as an ARC, and I plan to read it soon. It is a psychological suspense thriller, and this is also a debut novel by this author. And it looks at a complicated mother-daughter relationship. It deals with Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which is a term that I really hadn't heard of for a while, but there is one book that I read, I think Everything by Nicola Yoon, that deals with this idea. So it's where the mother kind of makes the daughter believe that she has this illness, but that she really doesn't, and it's kind of a mental disorder. Book is supposed to be like Sharp Objects meets The Lovely Wife, neither of book which I have read, but actually are both on my TBR, and I hope to read eventually. Dark, authentic, and a total page turner. And I know some people who have already read this book as an advanced reader, and they really, really liked it. So I am looking forward to reading this, and I will be checking this one out soon. So it's definitely one that I am going to read before the release date. So moving on to April releases. On April 7th, You and Me and Us by Alison Hammer is released. And this is women's fiction, which is one of my favorite genres. And it's supposed to be a heartbreaking yet hopeful story of a mother and daughter struggling to be a family without the one person who holds them together. Basically, I think the idea of this book is that the husband's stepdad gets diagnosed with cancer and how that affects the family dynamic how it affects the mother and how she reacts, and then the teenage daughter. And they, I guess, move to or spend a summer somewhere together, kind of like a last summer, you know, potentially of the father's life. But then the ex-wife is involved, and then, you know, the ex-wife and the new wife don't get along, and it just kind of sounds very character driven, but also one of those books that kind of deals with loss and what it can teach you. Just sounds really interesting. I also really like the cover of this book. There's something about the cover and the water that makes it really appealing to me. The next book that is on my list is a book that I actually have a physical arc for, and that is The Subtweet by Vivek, Shraya. Now, this is general fiction, and it's about so much falling in love, which we hear about all the time, but falling in friendship and what that means and what that can look like. It involves social media and Twitter and that sort of pop culture world. I guess it's kind of marketed as a love letter to brown women, which is interesting to me as someone who wants to read diverse books and own voices work. It kind of glimpses into the music industry and that whole social media, Twitter, pop culture world, which I am somewhat a part of, just in being on YouTube and being on Instagram. So that's really interesting to me. So this book also kind of includes like some text that is in the form of letters and in the form of tweets. And so I'm looking forward to really checking this out. I actually requested this from the publisher ECW Press, and they sent me an ARC copy. So this is one of like the first ARC books that I actually requested and received, which is very exciting. So I'm looking forward to reading this, and will likely read this very soon. The next book that I'm going to talk about is also out on April the 7th, and it's called Moments of Glad Grace by Alison Wearing. Now, this is also by ECW Press, and I do actually have a physical ARC copy of this book that I received at a librarian event earlier this fall. And this is a non-fiction title. I think it's the only non-fiction that's actually on this list. Alison tells the story of when her and her elderly father went to Ireland to do some genealogical research about their family, and just, you know, the story of that experience, what they learned about the family, what that experience meant. The elderly father as in the stages of Parkinson's disease, so there's that dynamic included in this book, and as well just the idea of, you know, enjoying the time that we have with our parents who are getting older, and just kind of making the most of that, not taking anything for granted. And that's kind of what her story is. It's supposed to be more of a narrative nonfiction, which I really enjoy that type of style. It sounds like a wonderful read, so I am looking forward to checking this one out as well. So the next book is also coming out in April, and it's called The Sweeney Sisters by Lian Dolan, and it comes out on April 28th. And it's also women's fiction, and it's about three sisters who lost their mother some time ago, but are now experiencing the unexpected death of their father. And I guess at some point they're having kind of a funeral service or a celebration of life event, and somebody crashes the party and basically claims to be a long lost sibling, and just how that kind of affects the dynamic, how it affects maybe the inheritance that they're going to get, and that type of story. So again, this sounds, you know, kind of very character driven, family saga, which I love. You know, what does it mean for this family? What does it mean about their father's legacy? You know, how does it kind of influence the image that the three original Sweeney sisters kind of had in their mind about their father? You know, it kind of maybe talks about exactly what truly makes a family. And so that's what kind of makes it most interesting to me. It just sounds really interesting and like a good read. The next book on my list comes out on May the 5th, and that's The Imperfects by Amy Meyerson. Now, I read Amy Meyerson's The Bookshop of yesterday's. Sorry, my foot's falling asleep. And I really liked it. It was a 5-star read for me, so that's why I immediately put this one on my radar of books that I'm looking forward to. The Imperfects, again, is general fiction. Just like the Sweeney sisters, it sounds like it also kind of deals with the family inheritance. So it's about the Miller family who get an inheritance that kind of leads them to do some research and investigating about the past of their family. Some secrets might be revealed. It's claimed to kind of be inspired by the true story of the still missing Florentine diamond, which I know nothing about, but sounds interesting. So it's supposed to be reminiscent of the book The Nest, which I think also deals with a family inheritance. And I did try to read that book, but I DNF'd it because I wasn't really enjoying it, but did really like the premise of it, which is why I picked it up. And again, I really like the premise because it's a family saga and it seems to be character driven. And if you can't tell by this video so far, those are two things that I really, really look for in books. I do have this as a digital arc from Netgalley, so I'm looking forward to checking it out. The next book that I'm looking forward to is called All Adults Here by Emma Straub, and it is general literary fiction. I haven't read anything else by this author, but I have had The Vacationers on my TBR shelf for a long time, so maybe I'll get to it one day. But this book sounds really interesting. It sounds to be like it's about a woman who witnesses a school bus accident, and it kind of jostles some sort of repressed memory about her family from her young parenting days. So she's now, you know, a bit older. Maybe she has grown children. It's about adult siblings, aging parents, high school relationships, middle school relationships, but the characters kind of age, so you see them at different points throughout the book, is my understanding. Again, a family saga that maybe spans a lifetime, which is also a trope that I do enjoy in books, when a book kind of covers a whole character's life or a larger chunk of a life rather than, you know, one moment in time. It just sounds interesting, so I definitely do plan to check that out, and it comes out on May the 5th. Another book that I'm looking forward to coming out this year is called East Coast Girls by Kerry, Kletter, and this is general fiction / women's fiction, and it's about childhood friends who used to get together every summer in Montauk, and then kind of on the summer during senior year of high school they experience a tragedy and then they lose touch, and now this book they're getting together about like 12 years later and decide to kind of reunite, and again something kind of goes wrong, and how those characters deal with it, what's happened in their lives to shape who they are, and how they use their friendship to overcome this event. Sounds really interesting. I do love reading books about friends, especially lifelong friends and women, so it has an interesting premise that intrigued me, and that's why I want to read it. I do have a digital copy from Netgalley of this book as well, so I do hope to read it in the next couple of months, and it might be like a good kind of light summer spring read, so I'm looking forward to that. And the last book on my list is called Two Truths and a Lie by Meg Mitchell-Moore, and it comes out on May 27th. The last book that I read by this author was called The Islanders. I read it last summer. It was really, really good, like summer read, and I think that this book will be the same. It's a warm, witty, and suspenseful novel filled with small town secrets, summer romance, big time lies, and spiked seltzer, and it's supposed to be reminiscent of Lian Moriarty. Set in like a beach town, and it focuses on two sets of mothers, daughters, and their relationships. Again, a book that is about family dynamics, mothers and daughters, friendships, set in a beach town or a small community. Those are all things that I pretty much love in books. So I'm very, very excited to read this. And again, I also have this as a digital advanced reader's copy from Netgalley. So thank you to Netgalley for that. And I look forward to reading this book later this year. So those are 15 books that I am looking forward to reading that are coming out in March, April, and May of 2020. These are just spring releases, and there's 15 of them. I haven't even looked at books that are coming out during the rest of 2020 because that will probably just add so much more to my TBR. And again, I don't know how many of these books that I'll actually read, but some of them I definitely do hope to read, especially if I already have a copy of them in my possession. I do plan to read it and review it before the release date. So let me know in the comments below if any of these books sounds interesting to you, if you're excited to read any of these. If you have already read any of these, just let me know what you think. I do hope that you enjoyed this video. If you're liking my content and you're enjoying my videos, please hit that subscribe button down below because that really, really does help to support me. You can also hit the like button as well, and we'll see you in my next video.